You're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I have a hole in my stomach!
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Renee Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to She Became Visible. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to introduce you to my guest today, and for many reasons. But for one of the reasons that I'm excited is we're going to put LDS church history in a corner today. We're not talking about that today because the theme of this broadcast is highlighting and recognizing women who have stood up and said, hey, I'm here. Do you see me? I have value. I have worth. I'm making a difference in the world. And so that is the story of all of the women that I have interviewed. But today, this person that has stood up and become very visible was also very instrumental in making another historical woman extremely visible. And if it wasn't for her, this woman may have just kind of gone away and people would not have recognized her amazing gift to the world that she had given. So there's many things wrapped into my guest today. So let me start out by introducing you to her. And I have to start out by saying, I'm really sorry that this guest, she hasn't really done a lot with her life. And, when I met her, I thought, oh, she's a nice person. I probably, out of the kindness of my heart, should have her on my, on my show. Okay, that's not true. Wait till you hear this resume, people. If you were feeling the least a bit invaluable today, you might want to just click off this resume reading part, because it'll make you feel like you're just lazy and you haven't done a stinking thing with your life. Okay, but let me introduce you. Okay, so Dana Muller's eclectic career has encompassed not only musical performances, recording, and teaching, but also public service and an interest in law and public policy. Over the past 4 decades, she has taught piano and music theory at institutions such as the University of Houston and the University of Southern California, the University of Hartford, Amherst College, and Mount Holyoke College. She maintained a private studio in Berkeley, California, New York City, and South Hadley, Massachusetts. Her book for adult beginner piano students, Keyboard Images, was used at a number of schools and by teachers in private studios. Ms. Muller and her husband Gary have recorded and concertized extensively as duo pianists. Throughout her music career, she has performed in recital with vocalists and instrumentalists. She earned her Doctor of Musical Arts degree from the Hart School, University of Hartford, where she wrote her doctoral thesis on the Scottish American pianist, composer, and teacher Helen Hopekirk. And Helen lived from 1856 to 1945. Her research led to a BBC interview and performances of Hopekirk's music in Scotland. In addition, she brought this neglected artist to the attention of Scotland's leading musicologists, who has included Hopekirk in the second edition of his History of Scottish Music and Musicians. Dana Miss Muller was elected to public office in South Hadley, Massachusetts in 2003 as one of 5 members of the town's Board of Select Persons, the governing council for the municipality. While serving in public office, Miss Muller, I love this, developed a keen interest in the interaction of law and society and decided to work on a law degree. It's like, I think I'll just go for a law degree now that I finished my doctorate in music. Oh my gosh. So she received her JD from the James E. Rogers College of Law at the University of Arizona in 2009, having written her law thesis on an issue related to music copyright and infringement lawsuits. Admitted to practice law in 3 states, she opted instead to continue collaborating with Mr. Steigerwalt, which is her husband, Gary, researching in more detail the life of Helen Hopekirk and performing, recording, and commissioning new works for the 4-hand and 2-piano repertoire. Is that not amazing? I mean, I think I got a load of laundry done today and I got my workout in. And while I was doing my workout, then thought of, maybe getting a law degree in physical education. It did not occur to me at all. So I'm just going to bring this amazing person on. And before I bring Dana on, I also want to tell you, I met Dana and her husband, Gary, while we were on a tour to Berlin on a Rick Steves tour. They were one of the fabulous couples that was there. And my husband and I just gravitated toward them. They're just the warmest, kindest people in the world. And what kills me now is having looked up Dana's music on YouTube, which I just type in Dana Muller, and that's Muller. And you can listen to some of her and Gary's work, and it's amazing. And the most frustrating part, Judge Dana, I will ask you about is those stupid copyright laws that did not allow me to get that music off of YouTube and share it with you today. Dang those copyright laws. So let's bring Dana on and let her tell a little bit about herself. Hey, how are you?
Hey there. Hey, it's great to see you, Renee.
It's so good to see you again. And I had you back there in the green room, as they call it, for a little bit. But I'm just so blessed to have met you and Gary, and I'm just so impressed with everything that you've accomplished. And I think what I love the most is that even after going back to school, getting your Juris Doctorate and getting licensed in 3 states, you were still like, yeah, but I'm going to go back to my music and stuff because that's really what I love the most. And that's the joy of being who you are and just going through life on this fabulous journey. And I love that.
Yeah, it took a lot of courage for Gary and me to decide that I could leave him in Massachusetts and come out to Arizona to go to law school. He was still teaching at Mount Holyoke College.
Oh.
But our idea, because I was 56 when I started the law degree, our idea was that, I could get a degree in Arizona because we knew we were going to retire out here.
Okay.
And we figured he could retire early and I could support us out here being a lawyer. And I graduated in 2009. No jobs were available.
No.
And that's one reason that I took the bar. I applied to the bar in 3 different states, Arizona, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, thinking that would give me a wider area to choose from or to try to apply for jobs. But it didn't work out. And during law school, we had performed a little bit, but I really missed the collaboration with Gary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even though my paper, my big law school paper, was on copyright and had to do with music, and my oral presentation of that paper involved performing music and presenting music to an audience, I missed. At that point, we were like one body with 4 hands and one brain.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that all happened. The doctorate for music, I wouldn't have achieved that without Gary.
Oh.
I mean, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. That was harder than law school.
Really?
Those of us who were doctoral candidates, especially the pianists, were so harassed by the faculty.
Really?
None of us, we had to play a number of recitals in addition to all the academic work that we did. None of us passed our first recital that we played.
Oh my God.
And that's kind of a kick in the pants there. You've practiced and practiced and you've worked and worked to present this program of music, and then you're told not good enough. And it took me 10 years to get that doctorate.
Shut up.
Yeah. And
what was the deal? I mean, was it the department itself just had this, we're going to kill you or to make you stronger, or was it an overall college, university idea that a doctorate in music was meh? Or what was the premise for all of that?
That particular music school and if you talk to people who worked on getting their doctorates, this happens in certain departments where the faculty just feels like you just cannot be their equal yet.
Oh.
And once you get your doctorate, then you're their equal. So they're going to make you really jump through the hoops.
Interesting.
Yeah. And for any doctoral student, being able to find a topic for your dissertation or your thesis, however you want to word it, that is a huge search. It's a big commitment to a topic that you're going to work on for several years, but it's also finding something that nobody else has researched before.
Right.
And so this whole thing with Helen Hopekirk is quite a story, because I was taking a course, I think it was my second semester at Hart, and it was on research and writing. And that professor was fabulous. And she helped me narrow down my topic for that particular class, which wasn't Hopekirk, but I was doing a lot of research on musicians in New England in the 19th century.
Okay.
And my resources were very old encyclopedias and books on music from the late 19th century, early 20th century. So a few women had made it into those books by then. There were several women in the Boston area who were developing careers as composers and performers. And this name, Helen Hopekirk, every once in a while would come up. And I thought, I've never heard of this one. I've heard of some of these other women. And then I read in one source that she rode in the suffragette parade in Boston. And that it was such a point of pride for her. And I thought, well, I've just got to track her down. Even though I'm researching this other stuff, I've just got to see what I can find. And so this was back in the days before internet. This was back in the card catalog days when you're sifting through those little 3x5 cards. And they had some of her solo music at the library. It was in Northampton, Massachusetts, right across the street from Smith College. And she had written nothing for four hands, but they had some of her solo music. So I go back into the stacks and I'm looking for her music. And there it is, just lying out on the cabinet, yellowed paper this music that hadn't been checked out since 1918. And so I take it to the librarian and I said, is there any chance you'd let me take this home to play? And she says, I don't see why not. And I thought, well,
nobody else wants
crumbling.
it. Yeah.
It's crumbling and falling apart. But anyway, so it was a set of pieces based on Scottish themes. And I got it home and Gary was still at school teaching. And so I played through these pieces and I thought, these are just amazing. They've got a charm to them I haven't heard in other pieces. So Gary gets home and I said, look at this music I found. And I played one of the pieces, which was particularly striking. And he just looked at me and he said, there's your dissertation.
No.
So, okay, so we start trying to find what we can. It turns out there are boxes of materials at the Library of Congress that had been donated by one of her students back in the 1940s after she died. And so maybe a year and a half after we started that work, we sent out a Christmas letter. And we said, oh, Dana's working on this paper on Helen Hopekirk. And a couple of weeks later, we get a letter back from the dear man who married us, which he was a Presbyterian minister in New Jersey. Well, Gary and I met in New York City. We got married in the National Arts Club in New York City. Neither one of us was associated with any church. And we were going, who's going to marry us? And Gary said, well, you know, I used to play concerts at this church in New Jersey, this Presbyterian church. Maybe that minister would marry us. So he and his wife were lovely, and his wife was a Mount Holyoke graduate, so she really loved Gary since he was teaching there. But anyway, we sent this Christmas letter. A couple of weeks later, we get a letter back from them saying, we cannot believe that you are doing research on Helen Hopekirk. Her portrait is hanging in our guest room.
No.
Oil portrait. Gary probably slept under it when he would go over there to play concerts. He'd have to stay overnight in their guest room. And it turns out that Mrs. Talcott, the minister's wife, her great Aunt Bessie was one of Hopekirk's biggest patrons. And she is the one who donated all these boxes of materials to the Library of Congress.
That is insane.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
It's just, and of course, Hopekirk had immigrated. She and her husband had immigrated from Scotland to Boston in the late 19th century. So we actually found a few people who had studied with her back in the 1920s and who could talk about what she was like as a person, as a pianist, as a teacher. And Helen Hopekirk has been part of our marriage.
No kidding. What year was this? What year was this that you could find students that had studied in 1920?
1990.
Okay.
Yeah, they had studied with her when they were young.
Yeah.
Maybe in their 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, and one woman actually studied with Hopekirk in the 1940s, early 1940s.
Okay.
And she had a wonderful, she could demonstrate so well how Hopekirk played and what it was like to take a lesson with Hopekirk, and said that Hopekirk helped her prepare a concerto that she was going to play with the Boston Pops. And they worked really hard on it and had it shaped just the way Hopekirk thought it should be. And Denise got to the first rehearsal with the orchestra and the conductor says, no, we're not doing that. We're going to play it straight. None of this slowing down, speeding up. We're just going to play it straight. And so Denise said Hopekirk came to the concert and never spoke of it again. Ooh. She was so disappointed in the way the conductor and orchestra played the piece. Wow. So those of us who have studied performance from the 19th century as compared to the mid 20th century, we know that musicians in the 19th century took a lot more freedom with pieces that they played. They didn't play them just exactly metronomically, and
right.
put a lot more emotion and a lot more of their own interpretive attitudes into it. I mean, the composer gives you a lot of guidelines usually, where to play soft and loud, where to slow down, and phrase marks and things. But Hopekirk, of course, knew some of these composers in her own time.
Gosh.
And, played some of their pieces for the first time.
Right.
And introduced some of their music to the Boston audiences. So that's Helen Hopekirk. And now with the internet, Gary has just gone down one rabbit hole after another. And as you know, he just 2 months ago discovered someone distantly related to Hopekirk in that her grandmother was the painter of this portrait of Hopekirk that hung in the guest room in New Jersey.
Oh my God.
And that we eventually we assisted Hopekirk's distant relative cousin to get it into the National Portrait Gallery in Scotland.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the gallery, we took it across the pond, we packed it up in an old suit, with those suit bags that men used to carry on board, packed it in there real carefully, took it across to Glasgow, where Hopekirk's second cousin lived. And he got it into the portrait gallery. Now, Hopekirk in her time had turned down the portrait that the portrait gallery had commissioned of her. She didn't like the portrait that gallery did of her.
Wow.
So the woman, and it was a woman who painted this portrait.
Love it. It's amazing.
Johanna von Lersel. And her granddaughter lives in Vienna. And that is who we spent an afternoon and evening with while we were there on that tour. And she kept her grandmother's letters from Hopekirk's husband, because Hopekirk's husband was coaching her in landscape painting. Johanna was a brilliant portrait painter.
Wow.
But she wanted to learn landscape. So she became very close to Hopekirk and her husband.
Right.
And then her diaries. I think I talked to you about her diaries when we were in Vienna, that, she was about 30 when she was corresponding with Hopekirk and Wilson and getting together with them in Hallstatt. But she was really trying to build her own career and was so frustrated that she felt like she needed a studio of her own where she could paint undisturbed. And she finally got one painting accepted at a show. And that was that page in her diary, big day, this painting has been accepted.
Wow.
But she was up against the patriarchy.
Right.
And just like Hopekirk was.
Right.
And one of the quotes from Hopekirk, which I used at the beginning of my doctoral paper, was, "All I want is a fair field and no favor. That I want my music to be regarded as men's music is, not because I'm a woman, but for the sake of the music."
Right. Isn't that what they say? It's not because I'm a woman. It's not because of anything else. It's because my music is amazing in general, or my acting, or my literature, whatever. You just want to be on a level playing field with no because of in front of it. And then the fact that you said that you knew that she was active in the suffragette movement just shows how deep that feeling was of just wanting equality and looked at as a human and not as a woman that does music or anything else. Just like, no, this woman is a musician. And did you find out, go back a little bit with her story as far as like, how old was she? Because she was born in Glasgow, lived there, and then how old was she when they immigrated?
Oh, she was 40. Let's see, she was born in 1856 in a little town just outside of Edinburgh. She was actually born in Portobello.
Okay.
And she went to Leipzig to conservatory when she was 19. So what is that, 1875? And she and her husband, he really supported her career. He left his position to be her manager. And so she did 2 big American tours. And, she did get great reviews as a concert pianist. And the late 19th century, more and more women were able to perform and concertize. And then she decided that she needed to stop performing. She was in her mid-30s, stop performing and improve her piano playing. She felt like something was missing from her own piano playing. So they moved to Vienna so she can study with a particular teacher.
Oh my God.
And I have to say, these letters back and forth and Johanna's diaries are part in German, part in English. They were, and they probably knew French also.
Yeah.
And it's embarrassing now that some of us, all we can talk in is English, and we don't know a variety of languages. Exactly. But she spent about 1.5 years just studying and perfecting her playing. And because her teacher thought so highly of her, now here we go. He says, she's the finest female woman musician I've ever met. So even he had to qualify it.
Yeah.
But he recommended that she study composition as well. So she had done a little composing in the past, but this is where she really started to work on her composing and composing bigger works like piano sonatas for violin and piano, and more sophisticated songs, not just like folk songs based on Scottish ballads. So they went from there to London, and in 1897, early 1897, she was planning to take 2 concertos she had written. I mean, these are big pieces for piano and orchestra, huge pieces, lots of notes. And she was going to take these 2 pieces to America and hopefully find an orchestra to play them, and she would be the soloist. So what would that be, 1856 to 97? She was 41.
Right.
About a week before she was to leave, her husband was hit by a cart in Leicester Square in London and suffered a very bad head injury.
Oh.
So she had to postpone everything, put everything on hold. And he recovered enough that by the summer, she could take him to Switzerland, to a place where they used to vacation, and, let him recuperate. And then they went to Boston. And in the meantime, she started writing her contacts in Boston. And one of her former classmates from Leipzig was now the dean or the president of the New England Conservatory of Music. So he offered her a position.
I see.
So they moved to Boston when she was 41, and she joined the faculty at the Boston Conservatory and lasted 3 years because she couldn't stand being held to an hour lesson. She'd start to teach and the bell would ring for classes to change. And she wasn't done with that student yet.
Exactly. I mean, she's an artist. You can't put a timeline on that creativity.
Right. So she just started teaching in her own private studio, and everybody knew she was the person to study with. So she always had a class of students.
Okay.
But it was her responsibility to support them because her husband no longer was able to, I mean, there's just one rabbit hole after another. He was part owner of a company in Scotland, and the other owner was running the company and sending Hopekirk and Wilson, her husband, like interest on the stocks they owned all these years. So they were able to live on that.
Right.
Well, the month before she was going to come to America, the month before her husband fell and got hit in the head, the company went bankrupt.
Oh.
So that source of income was gone.
Right.
So it was really up to her to do the teaching and make, you don't get much money for performing. I don't care, except unless you're Horowitz or somebody.
Yeah.
But this, it's so much like a friend of ours who was a German composer who we both studied with. We both took lessons with her in New York City. Her husband would lose money on the stock market, and he was a painter, but he never sold paintings. And so it was up to her to support them. And she did that by teaching private students, by teaching at NYU. And she still was, and she was also trying to compose, because what she really wanted to do was compose.
Wow.
She was an incredible teacher. We learned so much from her. But I just kept thinking, we've just found out these facts about the bankruptcy and all of that just in the past few months. And I keep thinking of our friend Ruth, and it's a similar situation.
Exactly.
Where the woman is responsible for, paying the bills and, I have to say, Renee, I listened to some of your interview with the 21st century saints ladies in Scotland. I could never have raised 6 kids.
Oh.
To me, that is so awesome. But I know that you felt like, give me some credit here for this amazing thing I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so these, I think of these women who are trying to follow a real talent.
Yeah.
And a real, it's their spirit, it's their soul.
Right.
They need to create.
Right.
And yet at the same time, they've got to be supporting the household.
Yeah. And you do hear that so many times. There's the men that get the opportunity to be creative or pursue their love or get their degree and whatever, and they've got, and even when they start a business, there's so many. I was so fortunate to not be talented in that area in any way. And, you'll see these men, and because I used to go with my husband to the conferences for his business, and the women were always the bookkeepers. They were taking care of all the books. They were doing payroll. They were doing all the scheduling. They were keeping that business afloat. And the men were doing the business, and you see that all the time. And then you'll go to the conventions and they'll be like, well, Mr. Jones is the president of this company. And, he's got 3,000 employees and blah, blah, blah. Absolutely no recognition whatsoever for his wife that sits behind and makes sure that the company stays functioning. And there was even what was I watching the other day? But it was the same thing. Her husband had struggled and she was keeping the business afloat while he was, doing all of his stuff. And that's just so common. And when you get into in fact, I just listened to a podcast yesterday. It was a fabulous podcast about a wonderful theologian who had just died. I don't know exactly what the cancer was, but it started out in her eye and then it eventually metastasized and she just died last year. But she was fortunate enough to get a lot of her education before she married. She didn't marry until her 30s. And then they had 3 children. So she was able to kind of get that background, that stuff underneath that you need before, because I have a lot of friends that got their bachelor's degree. They may have even started on their master's before they started having children. And then once the kids got into school, they could I'm going to go back and finish my master's degree or whatever, because they had that undergraduate stuff done. But to start from scratch, and it's what I loved about this podcast was that this woman has set up a foundation now to support women with young children if they want to go back to school, because she saw how difficult it was to be, like you say, the breadwinner or the one that's taking care of the family so that the husband can, go on and probably be the breadwinner or whatever. But Anyway, did Helen have children then? It doesn't sound like she
No,
did.
no.
Yeah.
And it never came up.
So
Never.
don't know necessarily why, or if it was a choice or anything like that. Hard to decide if it was a choice in 1870 something, but
Yeah.
interesting. So, and now listening to, and then I could see how much information do you have on her work in the suffragette movement? Just a side note.
Her notes are notes of her students who interviewed her, but then one of her colleagues, Mabel Daniels, was really big in the suffragette movement in Boston, and Mabel had just gotten herself one of those new tootling cars, and she invited Hopekirk to ride with her in the car. Well, first of all, here's a woman driving one of these cars in the parade, and Hopekirk sitting next to her, and Mabel Daniels goes on for pages in her diary, and we turned this corner and we saw these people and there were flags, and just describing the whole parade.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would be wonderful. We may put it in the end notes. It's just it's so exciting to read this woman's reaction to being in this parade and how supportive everybody was, and ended up saying, I can't imagine that this won't pass with all this excitement.
Yeah.
I think the men are on our side.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's amazing. So take me back, because listening, it just absolutely kills me that I didn't get a chance to listen to your and Gary's playing until, here we are back home again. And I think to myself, was there not a piano anywhere when we were in Vienna or Berlin? Did we miss an opportunity? Because I'm just blown away. All of the arts, the people that can draw and paint and are musically inclined, that's just those are the people that because I know that it's just a God-given talent that then has to be, watered and fertilized. But the people that have this gift, I just feel like it's just this you're born with it. So tell me, little Dana's story. Growing up, did you grow up with a musical family? Did everyone play the piano, or what's this? Where did you grow up, and what was your musical background before all of this wonderfulness?
both of my parents played music. My mother sang and played the piano, and my father played violin. And they both had parents who made sure they got good training in these little bitty towns in Oklahoma. My mother was in southwestern Oklahoma. My father was up in northeast, near outside of Tulsa. And this was during the Depression. There wasn't a lot of money, but their parents made money available for them to have lessons, and especially for my father to have a violin, because in my mother's family and the extended family, everybody played piano. So, they had an old upright. And mother went to college as a music major, and then decided I'm not good enough to be a music major. And she switched to home ec.
Oh, of course she did.
And
her brain fell into place, and she knew her place, and she knew that was the only thing she was going to ever do. So that makes sense.
She said, I just can't wait to get married and have children and use all this information I'm learning. Well, she was like you. She loved having babies.
Yeah.
She loved having a baby. But when we got to be about 9 years old, we were
it's just not as fun when they get
unless we can help babysit. But she always played, and she taught me to read music using a little toy xylophone and a blackboard. We didn't have a piano.
Yeah.
And finally, right before I started second grade, when I was 7, she and my father went out and shopped for the best piano they could afford. And, she said, we're going to have a visitor tomorrow. And we all, at that point I had 2 younger sisters, and what is it? What is it? And you just have to wait. And then they delivered this piano, and I sat down and she showed me where middle C was. And since I already could read music, I just started playing.
No.
So I learned the first few little pieces and teaching little fingers to play. And then she called the best teacher in Tulsa, who also happened to be like 4 blocks away from us, and just bargained with her about getting me on her schedule, because this woman, everybody was studying with her.
Yeah.
So Margaret Freeze put me in at 8 a.m. on Monday mornings. And my first lesson, I went in with my little book and the little pieces I had learned. And she listened to me play them one time by myself. And she said, okay, play through them again. And she went to her second piano and started playing an accompaniment to them. And I still get a chill when I tell this story.
Yeah.
I thought, this is the best thing ever. And I've always loved playing with other people, whether it's Gary or a singer or an instrumentalist. I've always preferred that to playing by myself.
Oh my gosh. Because you can just hear what the harmony, how more than one person, what that does. You can just hear it and feel it.
Yeah, and you get the energy of the other person, and then that ignites your energy. There's just something about it I just really love, and I always have. And I love working in groups. I'm not a good solo worker, regardless of what the project is.
Interesting.
And so, I could read music really quickly and easily. And by the time I was, in the 3rd or 4th grade, I could accompany my father, because that was part of their courtship. My mother would play piano and my father would play violin. They'd play pieces together. Mm-hmm. So then I was able to do that with him. And I just thought, this is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And my sisters, I have 3 younger sisters and a younger brother. Every one of them is musical, but nobody pursued it like I did.
Okay.
One sister can play by ear, but she's really a talented artist. So she created 2 of the covers for our CDs.
Oh my gosh.
And another sister is just such a gifted dancer. She danced with the Dallas Metropolitan Ballet. And again, my mother got her into that school, because Trish said, I'm going to take dance lessons even if I have to walk.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So, my parents really were so supportive in that way.
That's what I was going to say. They were so supportive. And I love that they supported them in their individual gifts.
Yes.
That it wasn't like, no, doggone it, everybody in this family is going to play the piano. It's like, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? Yeah. That's amazing. But but I also love the fact that this was, nobody was like, mom was not going outside demanding that you come in and practice piano. This was a love that you had that nobody had to, bait you into at all.
Oh, well, there were times. She set a time for me every morning when I was in elementary school.
Oh, okay.
In the very beginning, 15 minutes before we left for school.
Okay.
So she always set up schedules for us.
Right.
And at one time I was so angry about a piece, I couldn't get it. It was not coming for me. And I was throwing fits and saying, I don't want to take piano anymore. And she says, good, I'm tired of listening to you. Well, of course, I'm not going to quit. She was a very smart cookie about things like that.
Exactly. So when you were in high school, did you use it at all at school? Were you accompanying the choir or anything like that? You did?
In junior high and high school. Yeah, Gary and I both did that.
Okay. Now did you know each other in high school?
No, he grew up outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. And even though I was born in Texas, we spent the first 10 years of my life in Tulsa.
Okay.
And then when I was 10, we moved, my father got transferred to Dallas. So in Dallas, that's where my piano training really kicked into high gear, because I was studying with a young woman who was a concert pianist. And I don't know that I would have gone as far as I did with music if we had stayed in Tulsa.
Oh.
But it's hard to explain. She was an odd teacher. She was not very verbal.
Yeah.
So you had to just kind of watch and listen to her and then do what she did, which isn't the best way to learn. But I was a hard worker.
Yeah.
And by that time, by the time I was my brother was born when I was 12.
Okay.
So there's a big range there. And there are 3 kids in between. And at that point, I felt like I had to make a niche for myself somehow.
Yeah.
And music was, by that time, music also was a habit, if nothing else.
Right.
And I did really like it. There were pieces now that I could play that I'd always wanted to play. And, but again, Mother would say, you're going to practice during these times.
Right. Right.
And I think that's very helpful.
Right.
It's setting a schedule and letting a child know you've got to have the discipline.
Yeah.
To practice at this time.
Yeah.
Because if you just leave.
Yeah, they need to know what's expected. And if you do create a pattern, then it just becomes part of life. And so that's amazing. So you moved to Dallas. Now, where are you in your education? You've graduated from high school. Are you now going to pursue your music degree, your undergraduate?
Dallas when I was in the 5th grade. So I studied from 5th grade through high school with this woman in Dallas. And then she recommended that I study with one of her colleagues who was at LSU in Baton Rouge.
Wow.
And it was a really good choice for me because he was such a different teacher. I mean, she gave me technique. I had technique and, I had won some little high school competitions and things, but he just brought joy to the whole thing. I mean, he was a wonderful teacher, but he knew how to bring out your own joy with it and your own best approach to it.
Right.
And I adored that man. If he had told me to go jump in the Mississippi River, I would have done it.
Okay, I'll be back. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, so you head off to Louisiana to go to school. You are just in the South. Just Tulsa and Dallas and Louisiana.
Yeah.
That's so you finished your bachelor's,
and then I went over to Austin, Texas for my master's. I went immediately into my master's work.
Okay.
And I'd always said that that's what I would do. That I'd get my bachelor's and master's, and then go off and teach for a while, and then later go for my doctorate.
I see. So that was kind of always in the background.
Oh, yes. That was very much my plan.
Now, was there ever a time, because I remember we had a neighbor when we lived in Oregon, and they moved into the house next door, and they had 3 or 4 kids, and they had a daughter that played the piano, and the windows were open. That was the most beautiful thing. She's a fellow Arizonian, you guys. And so you understand the beauty of opening up your windows. We don't do that a lot around here, but so their windows were open in Oregon, and I could hear her playing, and she did pretty well, like you say, in high school. She went out to college, and she's trying out to get into the music program, and that's when her eyes were opened. It's like, oh, I'm good in this little town in Oregon. I ain't so good up against these people, and I've heard a lot of other people say that they were a big fish in a little pond, and then they got out to college or whatever, and people from all over the country, were trying to get into the same music program. Did you ever find that? When you went down to Louisiana, were you like, oh, okay? I mean, was there ever a time where you were like, this is going to be hard?
My teacher in Dallas said, you are not ready for Juilliard.
Okay.
And my mother said, you're not ready for New York City. I don't care what Monty Hill Davis says.
Whatever that means.
In New York City.
Yeah.
But my teacher, Monty Hill Davis, my teacher said, nah, you're not ready for Juilliard. And she said, the only other person I would want you to study with besides the person in Baton Rouge was a teacher in Austin at the University of Texas. And he said, you're not ready for him either. I'm barely ready for him myself.
Oh.
So And she said it just about like that.
Yeah. Well, no mincing words, I guess.
Yeah. When I was supposed to play it wasn't so much a competition, but it was a Texas-wide where you would play for a judge and get comments back and then get a medal if you earned a certain number of points. And so I had my pieces ready and I played for her the day before I was to go play in this regional thing. And she listened to me. She says, well, I guess you'll do okay.
Oh, okay.
So, okay. And I go and I play. And the judge writes, I have never heard such fine Mozart playing from a high school student. And I thought, gee, he must not be very smart.
He must not. But here you are getting these two messages. Well, I guess
exactly.
You'll do. And then the other guy's like, wowza, you know. Did you ever apply for Juilliard? I mean, you probably were good enough to get into Juilliard. Do you think looking back?
I don't think so. Gary got into Juilliard. Gary is just a whole nother story about being born to be a pianist.
On, so.
Yeah.
He's the next part of this
but he found a teacher in Bethlehem, and just out, the next city over from Allentown. It was actually his high school choir director said, you need to go study with this woman.
Okay.
And he had been studying with a little neighborhood teacher for 4 years. And, he already surpassed what she could teach him. So his parents would drive him to Bethlehem every 2 weeks. And he had to have 3-hour lessons with this woman who was a Juilliard graduate herself.
Okay.
And her goal was to get Gary into Juilliard. And she took him to Juilliard and had him play for one of her former classmates who was now on the faculty at Juilliard, and pretty much said, you got to take Gary. He's going to be really good. And so the guy took Gary into his class. But I don't know that Gary would have gotten in otherwise. I have no idea. I guess I didn't hear Gary play back then. But
isn't that the world, though? It's who you know, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
So,
okay. To answer your other question, when I got to LSU, I was a big fish in a medium pond.
Okay.
I was definitely, there were a couple of other pianists who were really good, really bright people. But I still was able to hold my own.
Wow.
And then when I went to Texas, it was up to an even bigger pond.
Yeah.
And that was more competitive.
Yeah.
But at that point, all I wanted to do was get my master's degree and graduate and get a job.
Yeah.
So that's where I felt like, I took a variety of courses. I took a class in how to teach music theory and also group piano, where you have like 10 pianos, electronic pianos in a room, and you teach beginners in that way. So I got some skills under my belt that made me more marketable.
I see.
And so I got that job at the University of Houston as my first job.
Okay.
And I was busy in that job. I was teaching group piano, supervising teaching assistants, doing a lot of accompanying, playing for instrumentalists and singers. And then I got married.
Dun, dun, dun. And then it all went to hell after that. No.
It did.
The first mistake.
But because I got married to somebody who wanted to he was getting his degree at Rice University in Houston. He got a postdoc out in Berkeley. So after 1 year teaching in Houston, we moved to Berkeley. And I met this incredible pianist who had been Gary's best friend at Juilliard. Richard and I got to be really good friends, and we both moved to Los Angeles from Berkeley after a year in Berkeley. I had a job. I'd gotten a job at USC, And Richard was going to work on his doctorate in piano at USC. He was the one person my husband could tolerate.
Oh.
If, all my other friends that I had, my husband was not interested in them, but he really liked Richard.
Okay.
So 3 years in LA, and Richard and I, were good friends, and Richard and Gary were still talking long distance because Gary was still in New York. And I'd hear about Gary from Richard, and Gary would hear about me from Richard. And after 3 years, Richard and I both just happened to move back to the East Coast. My husband was from New York originally, New Jersey, and he wanted to go back home.
Okay.
So Richard got a job teaching in a small school outside of Philadelphia. And my husband and I were living in New Jersey. And guess what? My husband wanted to do an internship. So there I was having to support us.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I had all these secretarial skills. My mother made me take typing and shorthand in high school, much against my desires. But so I went into New York City and I got myself a job. And I was commuting from New Jersey to New York City and back and forth. And eventually, our friend Richard came into the city, and he and Gary and I got together for dinner one night. I thought Gary was the nicest person I had ever met in all my life.
He kind of is, I have to say.
Yeah. He was such a good listener and asked such good questions and really listened. And so he was saying that this was in May, and he was saying that he was, and by this time he had, oh no, I'm getting my years mixed up. No, okay, so he was going to play a concert in New York City in 2 months. And I said, oh, I really want to go to that concert. He said, oh, great, here's the information. So I go to this concert, and he walks out on stage and starts playing. And I just thought, this is what I have been listening for my whole life.
Oh my God.
This way of playing, this sound, this interpretation of the music, everything. I just loved it. It just, because I'd always been a little frustrated about playing.
Yeah.
I never got to the point where pieces sounded the way I could hear them in my head.
Ah,
he was playing the way I heard things in my head.
Yes.
And
I hear that from when we were on the tour, and they would talk about Beethoven and Mozart and how it's got to get it out of my head. It's all up there, and you hear that so often.
Yeah. So we stayed in touch for a couple of years. He was still concertizing and, traveling to playing in England and Hungary and all over the place. But he would send me postcards, and he'd just say, hi, I just want to stay in touch. And so then after about 2 years, he got the job at Mount Holyoke College. And he came down. I guess this is when we had a second dinner with Richard. And Gary said, I'm going to be coming to the city. He still had an apartment. He says, I'll be in the city for the summer. And he said, I'm looking forward to jogging.
Oh, okay.
And I said, oh, I'll jog with you. Give me a call when you get to the city. I'll jog with you. And he goes, oh, great. Okay. So I go to work the next day, at the office where I'm administrative assistant. And I said to a friend, you've got to teach me how to jog in the next 2 weeks.
Oh, you're doing a marathon next Saturday? I'd love to join you. No problem.
So she took me to a really good athletic shoe store and helped me pick out shoes. And she said, now what you do is you walk 50 steps, you run 50 steps. You just keep alternating and build up your endurance. Okay. So that was before we started dating. That's what we did. We ran up and down Riverside Park in New York City at 6:30 in the morning. Oh, and, it was a great way to get to know somebody.
I was going to say, but in the meantime, what have you done with the husband?
Oh, I divorced.
Okay,
I divorced him.
Okay, so he was long. He's like, this isn't working, dude. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, exactly.
You go do your apprentice thing, and you figure out how to do this. And in the meantime, I'm going to go to work. And
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
That's good. So
And that was right after New York State adopted no-fault divorce.
Oh.
So it was pretty simple.
Yeah. No
It
children
was
involved. You guys weren't, we didn't have a lot of equity and things that we had to break up, and it's like, you go your way, I'll go mine. Goodbye.
right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So smart though. So smart. My husband and I were just talking about that, there used to be, I mean, when my dad and my stepdad and my mom got married, he was from England, and he was the baby of the family, had 3 sisters, and his mother was just, you cannot marry a divorced woman, that type of thing. There's that stigma, back in those days. But she was, gosh, dad was born in 27. So she's way back there, that she still has that mentality. But
Well, I have to tell you, I've got 3 sisters. All 4 of us have been divorced.
yeah. I wish people understood that in fact, I was just listening to another podcast, and this guy was saying, why did you put up with that for so long? This lady was talking about her husband. He said, there is this thing called divorce, and it's like, anyway, so that's fabulous. Okay. So now, have you played with Gary yet? I mean, has there been a 4 hands thing yet?
Oh my gosh. So, we dated we were talking to one of the couples on the tour, comparing notes on courtship.
Yeah.
And I said, well, for our first day, Gary took me to see War Games. And, I lived, just a few blocks from Lincoln Center. And by that time, I was working for the conductor of Mostly Mozart in the 92nd Street Y. I'd left the job for the big company, and I was just working as his assistant. So anyway, Gary goes to Lincoln Center and buys a Mostly Mozart t-shirt about this color, but with Mostly Mozart across it. And he didn't come to my apartment to pick me up. He says, let's meet at 76th and Broadway. Okay, fine. It's New York City. That's what people do.
Yeah.
So I walk up there, and he has a brown paper bag in his hand. He goes, here. And it's the t-shirt.
He can play the piano really well, but romance, maybe.
It didn't matter. I mean, the way he played the piano, oh gosh.
That's exactly right. It's like that joke where they say where this guy married this woman. She wasn't really much of a looker, but she could sing. And he woke up one morning, and he leaned over and he said, sing, It's like,
I've never heard that story. That is really good.
Oh my gosh. So you guys have been married for what, 30 something years, right?
Yeah, 38. We got married in 1985.
Okay. Yeah.
And we got engaged after I made an appointment with him. I said, let's go meet in Central Park and talk about whether we have a future.
Oh.
And I gave him a list of questions to consider. This is how Gary functions the best.
Could you women start taking notes? This is what you have to do. Okay. At some point, you gotta do this. That's so funny.
So we met, and it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in Central Park in the summer. And we sat out on a blanket and probably had some snacks and went through this list of questions. And I said, so what do you think? And he said, well, I think I might be ready to possibly talk about getting hitched.
Possibly, maybe, someday, could have. Okay.
Yeah, right. So that's just Gary. I mean, you have to give him time to think things through. Yeah. And 2 weeks later, he'll come back and answer it.
Yeah.
But so that was in the summer, and we were going to go to Dallas for Christmas so he could meet my parents.
Oh.
And right before we were going to leave, I said, they would get such a kick out of it if we played some forehand for them, because I used to play duets with my mother.
Oh, yeah.
And, and then I played with my father. And so I didn't have any music, but Gary had done some forehand playing with some of his colleagues at Juilliard.
Yeah.
So he pulled out some music. And the first piece he pulled out was this little piece by a French composer of the 1920s. Oh, very sardonic.
Yeah.
It takes 5 minutes to play it, but it has 3 movements. And he called it a sonata, like it was a big piece. And it starts out with Gary in the middle of the keyboard just doing a rhythmic chordal thing. Da, 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 da. And I didn't know the piece. I was just sight reading. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, in 4 bars, I have to reach across him like this and lean down because I got to play notes at each end of the keyboard. It's the first time I'd ever played with him. I was so mortified.
So you're at the same piano. You're not at, and
We're
you're
at the
not
same piano.
So
yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, I'm going in. Here we go.
Exactly. So what was so sweet was that then we had a fairly small wedding, but and we made the invitations ourselves. We took the first line and the title of that piece and had it reduced down and reproduced on little cardstock, and then wrote handwritten invitations to people.
Oh my gosh.
So, the very first piece we ever played together became the front piece of our invitation.
Yeah. And that's so amazing after all of the courtship and the conversation. And that still, it was that piano piece that actually brought you guys together to finalize the whole thing. I love that story. That's amazing.
And then we played at our own wedding.
Yeah. Oh, don't need to hire music. We'll take care of that.
Yeah, we'll take care of it.
Oh my gosh. So after you got married then, now you're married, and did you stop the administrative work and then go back more into teaching? Did you continue the piano?
I started my doctorate in music.
Oh, so right away he was like,
before we even got married. I started the doctorate in September. We got married in October.
Okay.
Let's put more pressure. Let's just see how much pressure we can.
Yeah, no big deal. Yeah. And 10 years. Now, why 10 years? I mean, I know doctorates are like you say, it's a toughie. You got to kind of check out of the real world. But what was it that took it for 10 years?
I got through all of the academic stuff in 2 years.
Okay.
You have to take what they call comprehensive exams at the end of 2 years. So I got those out of the way, but I still had these recitals to play, and I still had the paper to write, the thesis to write.
Right.
And still pretty much in the early stages of researching Hopekirk and still finding resources. And I still was I was teaching through the community division of the music school. So I was still going down there several days a week to teach, but there was no reason for me to be there otherwise.
I see.
And I had blown through 3 piano teachers there. Didn't get a thing from any of them except grief.
Yeah.
And was having to figure out, how am I going to prepare the next 2 recitals? And, I'm just being with Gary, playing with Gary, and having Gary listen to me and coach me was helpful.
Yeah.
But also when Gary was doing competitions, he had coached with a man in England. And Ben would come to New York for 2 or 3 weeks and set up in an apartment, and all the Juilliard students would moonlight with him because he was such a fabulous teacher.
Wow.
So I took lessons with him too.
Oh my God.
And
but that's part of the doctorate, is you actually have to solo perform in front of a panel, like a group.
An audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not just the 5 people that are on your doctoral, board or whatever.
Right.
You actually have to perform in front of an audience, and then is the board in the audience, and then they're judging by how the audience responds and the whole bit, and
not just how they respond. They could care less what the audience thinks.
Okay. And you have a certain number of recitals that you have to do. Do you have to arrange for these recitals, or do they?
Yes.
You have, and then do you have to advertise and get an audience?
Well, the advertising was primarily, people put posters up around the school, but only your best friends are going to come.
Okay.
And then, send out invitations to other people who might come in.
Okay. No pressure. Wow.
It's unbelievable.
So you got your did you get your recitals done before you got your thesis done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now you're.
Yeah, I got them out of the way. And then I started the degree in 85. In January of 95, I called my professor and I said, "You think I might graduate in May?" And he was from Vienna.
Oh.
So he had a German accent, very loud voice. He says, "You haven't given me anything to read yet."
Oh, I can just hear it. I can just hear it. Yeah.
So I pretty much wrote, except when I had to teach. I just sat at the computer and wrote and wrote and wrote. And, I would go 2 days and not change clothes if I wasn't teaching.
Because
we had all the information
that's
together.
What I was going to say. You had done the research. You just needed now to put it all together.
Yes.
And how long is this thesis?
Well, the biography part of it is about 100 pages.
Okay.
What I did was write a biography of her, and then I had a index of her piano pieces, all the piano pieces that we were able to locate. And then one of those big concertos that she had written for piano and orchestra was never published.
Oh.
And it was in her handwriting. It was in sketches at the Library of Congress.
Okay.
So there was a conductor score, which shows all the instrumentation plus the piano part. There were the orchestra parts, like the part that the flute would play, the individual part the oboe would play. And then there were her reduction of all of that into the piano solo and the second piano, which tries to imitate the orchestra. Mm. So this is very common. Composers will do this. You'll have, for rehearsal purposes, you'll have the orchestra reduced to something that a second piano can play, sounding like the orchestra. And they'll play with the soloist. So we had all of these scores in her handwriting, never been published. There were discrepancies among the scores. So I had to go through and identify. I had pages and pages. Measure 1, beat 3.
Wow.
On the orchestra score has this. On the piano score, it has this. On the flute part, it has this. And any discrepancies, I notated all of that. And then I made decisions about which of those was probably what she would have wanted in the final version.
Okay.
And by that time, there was music publishing software.
Yes.
And so Gary, bless his heart, he input all of this for the final thesis. The final thesis has 1 page of her score in her handwriting, but the rest of it is, looks like regular published music.
Yeah.
Thanks to Gary.
And then have you performed it?
He has. And if you go online to our web, or if you just Google Helen Hopekirk Concertstück, it's at our website under the Hopekirk heading.
Okay.
He played it with the Mount Holyoke Orchestra.
Oh.
It's an awkward piece to program for a regular orchestra because it's 20 minutes long.
Wow.
And that's more time than most conductors want to devote to one piece on an orchestral program.
Yeah.
But it was so perfect. Mount Holyoke College is an all-women's college.
Oh.
And he was a revered professor in the music department. And, everybody knew he was a fabulous pianist. And so finally, the latest conductor who had the orchestra at Mount Holyoke was a really innovative conductor, and he was gung-ho to do this piece.
Oh.
So I think it was Gary's last year at Mount Holyoke. They did the piece, and those students, they just went to town on the orchestra part. Because it was romantic. It was so lush. And, these are liberal arts students. These aren't conservatory students. And they did such a wonderful job.
Oh, my gosh. Well,
so
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's online. And there's also at our website, right before we moved from Massachusetts, he recorded a number of Hopekirk solo piano music.
Oh.
And it's just wonderful. It's wonderful playing. And,
Right.
and it's, it's music that you don't hear very often.
Right.
And
Right.
it has her personal stamp on it. You can hear Scottish inflections in it, and
Interesting.
it's gracious and it's powerful. And I was reading the painter, Johanna's diary one day when she was up in Scotland staying with Hopekirk and Wilson, and Hopekirk was practicing. And Lursel says, Hopekirk is such a flower.
Oh.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
I've never heard that description ever, but
Right.
she was a strong woman, but she also had this grace and beauty about her, as does her music.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I just love that, and this is one of the things I love about women is as you were pursuing your own path to become visible and to just acknowledge and procure these talents that you've been given, and you now want to be the best that you can be. But then what you did was you took her and you said, and now she needs to be seen. This is someone who needs to be recognized. So it's that classic story of the women, empowering other women, and how that was your goal. And I just, this is what I think I love the most about your story, was that you chose her to be your focus for your doctoral, and what you've done, how this person would have just, if you wouldn't have done this, she would have just gone into obscurity. And now she's, in Scotland, recognized, for her music and the history of her work. And it's because of your work that happened. And I just think that's amazing. So
and what's wonderful is other women have picked up on it now. And other women are citing her in their works, whether it's dissertations or books on women in music. So that's very gratifying.
That would be amazing. The BBC interview that you did, is that something that you can find on YouTube? Have you ever looked?
I've never looked, because this was back in 1990, maybe.
Okay, interesting.
But I don't know.
Like you say, if I Google her, then I can find your work, right? I mean, probably a lot of the stuff that your background information is probably in her Google search, right?
I hope so. We never check it that way. We've got a significant amount at our website.
And tell everyone what your website is too.
Interwoven4, FOUR.
Okay. .com.
.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interwoven4.com. Okay.
But that's I haven't thought about that BBC tape in so long.
Interesting.
I hope we have it somewhere in a box stashed away.
Yeah, you have to find it and see if you can transfer it. Well, this has just been an absolute pleasure. And look, I have to show you my t-shirt. It's like, ta-da.
Oh, weird. Oh, I love it.
I forget what this little guy, what's he called? I can't remember what he was called.
Something. Amp something.
Ask Gary, he'll know. Yeah, I'll look it up. But yeah, I got it when we were there in Berlin, and then I never wore it. And now I'm like, somebody that's been in Berlin would recognize this, so I'll have to wear it this summer. But anyway, it's just a thrill to have met you and Gary. And I love how he is definitely the wind beneath your wings, and so supportive, and just but I love the companionship, because you're both pursuing your own things, but that you're the perfect example of supporting each other as you're going along, and like you say, for him to say, go get your law degree,
Yeah. And even in performing, people comment on how, even though we're in absolute unity, I bring one kind of character to it, he brings another, and then it integrates.
Exactly.
So yeah, Renee, this has just been so much fun.
It's been so fun. Now, will you and Gary be performing anywhere at any time? You're not that far away. I would drive down to Tucson in a heartbeat. Are you guys going to be performing?
We do little soirees in our home.
Do you really? And you play?
Yeah. In fact, we're doing that this weekend. If you want to drive down this weekend, because we're getting ready for this concert in Colorado.
Oh,
And so we do what we call tryouts for
I see.
friends.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, let me know more about that concert in Colorado. That sounds like a fun reason to head over to the Rockies.
Lake City. Yeah.
When are you going to be there?
We're playing July 10.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a Monday, and it's elevation 8,600 feet.
Oh, does that make
It's
a
up in the
difference? I mean, when you're playing.
mountains. Yeah, we're going to get there a couple of days early, and friends have told us to take this chlor oxygen that oxygenates your blood so that you can adapt to the high altitude.
That's crazy. People
Isn't
don't
it?
understand how much that affects everything. You know, it's, I know I went on a little hiking thing last year, and there was one lady that got there early, and she got there a couple days early trying to acclimate. And the day that we were all supposed to meet and start the hike, she said, I can't do this. I feel she had altitude sickness already. I'm sure some people are more sensitive. I brought my little cans of oxygen just in case, but I never felt anything. You know, I never really, I mean, I don't know if I did. I never know whether it's that whole causation thing. Do I just not feel good, or was it the oxygen that made me? I don't know. I never could figure that out. But anyway, I've heard so many things, but I never even thought about even something as. But there's strenuousness to this piano playing there. There's
Oh my gosh, yes.
Your whole physical being is there. So there's a whole thing. So
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, sometimes we just do a soiree just,
okay.
For fun.
Yeah.
So I'll keep you on the list.
Yes, please let us know, because we love Tucson anyway. It's a great place to go. We usually haul our motorcycles down there, and Bisbee, we love Bisbee. And so yeah, that's a fun place to go. So, well, this has just been amazing. It's been so fun to reconnect, and everyone go to interwoven4.com and look at their work and listen. I mean, I am not a musician, but I love music. And it's so funny because I cannot carry a tune for the life of me. And I didn't know that I couldn't carry a tune, because I used to sing to, Anne Murray. I'd be putting up decorations or cleaning the house or whatever, and I'd have Anne Murray blaring, and I'm singing along with her, and I'm thinking, yeah, me and Anne Murray, we're good, And then we got a karaoke machine, and I'm listening to this voice, and I'm thinking, is there something wrong with this microphone? What's going on? And I am literally like, and the sitcoms, when you hear that person singing and they're like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that wasn't even close, but I feel like I can hear it. So if I'm listening to music, I'm like, oh, that was off, and it makes me so angry, because I have a mother who grew up harmonizing. Her and her sister, would go to carnivals, not carnival, but amusement things. They would sing together, and beautiful voice. She plays the piano by ear. She's never had any kind of training. And I'm like, did I get any genes at all? I mean, she paints. She's never had any official training, but she's got like a built-in perspective thing that she can do. And I'm like, I so got one side of that family. I got the DNA that was just like, I'm going to sell you a car. And that's my DNA.
No way. Oh, I tell you, I was mesmerized by the way you dressed on the tour. Just, oh my gosh.
Well, that is a weakness. In fact, my husband and I are heading out. We're going to try this snowbird thing. And so I'm packing up, and I said to him, I don't know how to do this, because I don't know, how do I leave these clothes here and take these clothes with me for 4 or 5 months? What if I want to wear this and it's in Arizona and I'm in Utah? And so the poor guy, he had to take a whole rental truck to take some of our furniture and stuff up there, plus 2 boxes of clothes that I might just want to wear while I'm up there. But the bad thing about the snowbird thing is it's summer in Arizona, but it's also summer where we're going. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to leave my winter clothes there and leave my summer clothes down here. And so, yeah, it's not a good thing. It's a curse. course, really.
You know how to put things together so beautifully.
Well, thank you.
And you know how to wear them too.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, thank you so much. Tell Gary we said hi, and did he get over? I know he got stricken when we were over there. Got a little bit of that.
Thank you. Yeah, he's much better now. He's back to running, and yeah, he's good.
Did he run at all when we were in Berlin and stuff? Did he go out for a jog?
No.
Yeah.
No.
That's
we did a lot of walking.
You know, my little Fitbit thing, you know, I think we averaged around 13,000 steps every day. And so my little average will come up and it'll say, you're not doing the same thing you were a few weeks ago. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. I'm not, you know. So
that's so interesting. Yeah.
But we did.
Well, take care and good luck with the snowbird adventure.
Thank you. And you know, best wishes for all of your adventures too. And I'm going to get on my calendar and see what we're doing July 10th. So you might see us in Colorado.
Oh, fun. Okay, great.
Thank you, Dana.
Bye, Renee.
Bye-bye. Oh my gosh. Okay. Any of you that are musically inclined, I mean, when I sit and listen to someone with as much talent as she and Gary have, it's just one of those things that it just astounds me, because I tried to put my girls in piano lessons, and my one daughter is a lot like my mom. She could play by ear. And the piano teacher said, she's not reading this music, she's playing by ear. That's not a good thing, you know. And then my other daughter, she's actually now taking piano lessons still as an adult, and has her kids in piano. So, but it's just definitely something that I am fascinated, just that two hands are doing two completely different things. I mean, that's enough for me. But anyway, Dana is amazing. Her husband, Gary, they're lovely people. And I love her story of what she did with Helen Hopekirk. And look her up and look up their work on interwoven4.com. And I love Dana's story of how she became visible and how she put herself on her trail and pursued her goals so intensely. And I love that. I love that Gary was a huge support for her. And I love that she brought Helen into visibility. And that's what it's all about. So fun podcast. And thank you so much, Dana, for joining me today. So I don't think I'll be seeing you next week, because it's the 4th of July that week. And, you know, we Americans, we kind of take, you know, it's like those of us that turn the entire month, you know, whatever our birthday is, we turn it. I think the 4th of July turns into the whole week. I mean, I have a class that I take on Wednesdays, and it's canceled because it's the 4th of July. And I'm like, yeah, but Wednesday's not the 4th of July. I think it's the 5th. But they're like, yeah, but it's canceled because it's the 4th of July. So obviously everyone's taking the whole week off. So I will not be podcasting next week, but the week after, we'll have another fabulous She Became Visible. So thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me today on She Became Visible. Join me each week as my guests and I explore the path of womanhood and tell all our stories. We'll talk about finding the courage to be ourselves and motivate each other to be everything that we're capable of and meant to be, no matter what happens around us. Please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to donate at SheBecameVisible.com.